And so now, at this point in the service, on second day Rosh HaShanah, our tradition has become that we ask our clergy to answer a question. And while much may feel different about this service, this is going to be one of those bits that's very familiar, as each one of the four clergy will have an opportunity to step up to our digital bimah and to answer a question. And we're thrilled that Rabbi Blumberg is joining us to serve as one of the answerers of this question. And so each year we as a clergy team discuss what is the question that we think needs answering by us? What is it that we need to consider? What is it that the community is interested in hearing our perspective on? And this year, as we were discussing it, it seemed very clear that the question is, what can Judaism teach us about surviving through a pandemic? That's the question of all of our lips. That's what we all want to hear about. And so hopefully we, as your clergy team, will be able to offer some insights into that, beginning first with Cantor Hollis.
Hello, friends. Shana Tova. So in terms of thinking about where we are in the world, I'm thinking a lot about how this pandemic has cost so much in the way of collateral damage, in addition to the illness itself, all that rolls out around it that has been so damaging. And yet at the same time, there's a tension with what I have been describing for myself as some of the collateral benefits, that at moments I find myself enjoying a blessing that comes of some of this very challenging stuff. A blessing like an unexpected chance to have dinner with my family, or to be able to work on my front porch in a beautiful, beautiful daylight, or a lovely young gentleman, Rabbi Jordi knows, who offers street dancing as a way to give back to the community. And when I enjoy one of these collateral benefits, I sometimes find myself rubber band snapping back into guilt or remorse, or feeling like it's unfair that all of that goodness can come at the cost of so much suffering. So being caught in this tension between these two poles. And I think that the teaching that Judaism offers me on that is Judaism teaches us to seek and to fully engage in joy wherever it can be found. We don't find an inherent blessing in suffering, although we're taught to learn from it wherever we can, but we do ritualize our way into joy at times where we might not otherwise be feeling it. Think about how on Friday night, wherever we're feeling before we arrive at Shabbat, we bring it in with kiddush, with sweet wine, to separate the ordinary from the holy and celebrate the sweetness. We carry the sweetness of Shabbat with us using spices at Havdalah. We light candles against the darkness at the time of Hanukkah to amplify joy. And I think of Sukkot as Zman Simchatenu, where the Torah literally calls it the time of your rejoicing, on the verge of the cold, rainy season, sitting outdoors in nature, appreciating our bounty on a holiday whose very name actually mandates joy. And even as my rabbi colleagues tease me about my 100 blessings a day, this idea that we have this human proclivity to amplify our kvetching instead of finding positives and naming them. None of this comes at the expense of acknowledging suffering when it's appropriate to be fully in that moment, and always to act on it if it's in our power to alleviate it. The Torah is full of instruction on that front, and actually embeds reminders of it even in our happiest moments, like smashing a glass at a wedding or removing drops of wine at Passover. But the reverse must be true. Even in challenging times, we are bidden to celebrate what there is to celebrate and not to be mired in guilt about enjoying a blessing or a moment of goodness. We're taught that if a funeral procession and a wedding processional meet in the crossroads, that actually the wedding is allowed to pass first, that we're taught to seek out and amplify joy. In the Talmud, in Berachot 9:3, we find this instruction. Mevarech al hara'a me'in hatova, ve'al hatova me'in hara'a. Bless upon the bad which contains good, and upon the good which contains bad. Here we're taught that both will be intertwined, but we're meant to say a bracha over exactly what's before us in the moment, even if it's pleasant in an unpleasant time, and not to travel down the catastrophizing road at every moment to what might happen in the future. It teaches us to remain fully in the moment we're already experiencing, to permit ourselves to feel the good where it comes, and try to be okay with being fully in it, without guilt or remorse, yet always with a measure of understanding that it's always our obligation to act and to help heal our broken world wherever we have the power to do so.
As we thank Cantor Hollis for her beautiful words and reflection that I'm sure provide much comfort to us all who are all struggling with this question, it's now my pleasure to call up our colleague, our teacher, our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Blumberg, to answer this question.
Thank you, Rabbi Burkeman, and my colleagues, my other colleagues. It is a delight to be here. It's weird and strange, and I find the electronics challenging, but I'm here. So I want to begin with a joke. An alarm is sounded that the world is about to experience a flood not seen since the days of Noah. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi, good friends, meet to discuss how they will respond. The priest says, well, I will recite the Lord's Prayer with deep fervor and look to Jesus for salvation. The Protestant minister responds, I will open the Bible to the miracle of Jesus walking on water and pray that God will renew this miracle for us. The rabbi responds, I will go to the nearest bookstore and buy a book titled How to Survive Underwater. I wish I could hear everyone laughing with great laughter. Built into our spiritual DNA are mechanisms for adjusting to new and difficult circumstances. I want to focus on two critical dimensions of this spiritual DNA. First, Bacharta B'chayim, choose life and its sacredness at every point. When things are difficult, we may need to adjust, sacrifice, compromise, but as long as we can breathe the breath of life and interact lovingly and find some beauty, meaning, and love in life with those around us, we will survive. Grasp these essentials of life. Appreciate them. Yes, we mourn our losses, our loved ones, the physical and material strength, the freedom and independence now compromised or diminished or even absent. But then we rebuild our lives on the blessings we still possess. That's one element of our spiritual DNA. And here's the second. We know the word tikva very well, hope. It is at the core of who we are as a people, and at the core of our collective consciousness accumulated over more than 2 millennia. We can say that it started with creation. God saw all that had been created and declared it was very good. Or perhaps more parochially with Abraham, Lech lecha, and I will bless you. Or to the Israelites in Egypt, and God remembered his promise and said to Moses, you shall free my people from slavery. Or with Isaiah, let the oppressed go free, share your bread with the hungry, and then when you cry out to me, I will respond, Hineni, I am here. Or we can point to the martyrs of our people in every age who heard these words spoken in the brand new state of Israel in 1948. By virtue of our natural and historic right and on the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael to be known as the State of Israel. The hope and love of life are built into every holiday and Shabbat observance, into every life cycle ceremony, every rabbinic teaching, and particularly at times like this, a time of great stress and of certain loss and of great uncertainty, of loneliness and sadness, the more we will understand and embrace that core of our collective Jewish spirit as it's reflected in our prayers, in our practices, in our Shabbat observance, then we will experience love of life and hope, even in the midst of a pandemic or even a flood. Very nice to be with you, and thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Blumberg, as always, for your insights, teaching, and just for your friendship and support of everything that we do in this community. It's so wonderful that despite the challenges of this moment, we were still able to bring you up onto our bima to be with us. And so now, if I could call up Rabbi Jordi to share her reflections.
Thank you. To everything that Cantor Hollis and Rabbi Blumberg have said, I want to say, yes, amen, that. And then I'll say a few more things along with that. So I heard a story recently about, it was a podcast story about a woman who has such an incredibly keen sense of smell that she has discovered that she can often smell devastating illnesses in people before they know themselves that they are ill. And she was being interviewed about how she has the strange ability to actually predict if what someone's fate will be. And the reporter who was talking to her said, so, what do you do with that knowledge? Because she's learned that morally, it does not, morally and also socially, it does not help her to go and tell the person who she is talking to, by the way, you have this illness. They need to come to that on their own. And then what they do with that is their own decision. And what she ended up saying is, what I need to do is do the next right thing. And I always need to think about what is the next right thing. And although this story that I heard was not in a Jewish context at all, it struck me so much as such a Jewish teaching that we might think that we know what fate is being handed to us by the universe. We might think that at a moment like this one of such strife and suffering, that it would be a time to despair. But that would be playing God. That would be acting like we know what's going to happen, and we don't. And what we can do is the next right thing. And we have so many teachings that say that, whether it is mitzvah goreret mitzvah, that one right deed leads to another right deed. We do the right thing, we're basically paying it forward to somebody else to do something else right. The teaching that it is lo alecha amlacha ligmor, it is not up to us to finish the work, but neither are we free to desist from it. And I think with that, this is, as Rabbi Blumberg said, this is also a form of choosing life. And we'll read that line on Yom Kippur afternoon of saying what is within our power at any given moment is to make the choice to do the next right thing and choose life. And by life, I mean not only survival, but actually the chance to embrace living. And finally, I see in our Torah that not only are we as Jews called on to continue to live and continue to learn, but I see within Torah an arc in which God is also learning. I think we see that in, especially most clearly in the story of Noah, where God floods the earth, and by the end of the Noah story, God promises not to do that again. And I see this in places where God and Moses are struggling with, who has it worse, or who is going to get too exasperated with the people and punish them, and all of those things. But in this story that we read this morning of the Akedah, and as Rabbi Danny talked about too, with that story, that whatever the test was, I don't know that God even went into that test knowing what God was really asking. And we talked a little bit yesterday with our Rosh HaShanah Mishpacha, Rosh HaShanah B'Yachad service yesterday, our family service where some of us stayed on afterwards for a conversation. We talked about that Abraham may have actually had a sense that sacrificing Isaac was not the right thing to do. And I told the story of my rabbi growing up, Earl Kaplan, Alav Shalom, who talked about that story as Abraham having the knife raised and just waiting and not moving forward. And I imagine it almost as a staring contest with God of, all right, who's going to give first? And I'm going to stand here with the knife raised, but I'm not going to do this because God, I imagine Abraham saying, you are teaching us to choose life. So why would you have me do this thing? And with that, I think God may learn from that story that it is the wrong thing to do to ask for sacrifice, but that when there is sacrifice that needs to be made, it needs to be done with comfort, with taking care of each other, and with always choosing life when we can. So I think that ultimately, one of Judaism's responses to pandemic is that we, along with God, need to keep learning. We, along with God, need to keep reminding ourselves to choose life. And we need to remember that survival is not enough, that doing the next right thing is what is ours to do.
Thank you, Rabbi Jordi, for adding that other perspective and about the choice of life that we are called to make. And so just to offer one final insight to add, and hopefully to complement the insights offered by my wonderful and esteemed colleagues, I can't resist a joke, because Rabbi Blumberg inspired me with his joke. But there is that saying that all of our Jewish holidays, although it doesn't really apply for Rosh HaShanah, are all about the same three-part story. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And that really is that sense of survival is therefore at the core of what we're trying to do and what we're aspiring to do. But I want to just look at a slightly different perspective on the pandemic. And the story that I keep coming back to is a story in the Talmud in Shabbat 33b, where we read about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son being in a cave for 12 years. And essentially they experience a prolonged period of quarantine. And the thing that I think comes to me so clearly from this text is the way that when they emerge, they are unable to relate to people in an appropriate, respectful, or even kind way. That's what keeps coming up whenever I look at the text. They come out and essentially they have laser eyes and they zap anyone with whom they disagree or see doing something that they don't approve of. And I think that's the real danger of a pandemic, that because of the isolation that we feel, we lose that ability to relate to the other person, to the people around us, and to be the kind, compassionate, caring people that we should be. And what happens to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son is that they're sent back into the cave for an extra year. It takes another year before they can come out. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes out ready to bring healing, but his son is not yet there. And it's only when they see another person doing something righteous that finally we read that their souls were quieted. And I think for all of us to survive this pandemic, it's about how we maintain that human connection, that personal connection, that relationship with the other, even when we can't be together, even when the other person might be a danger to us. But that's the challenge. And I think that this story, alongside all of these other teachings, help us to find ways that we can survive. And I think that idea, as Rabbi Blumberg said about the idea of hope, that for countless generations, we've never given up hope. And so we're not about to start now. And so despite all the challenges, we will overcome this moment, survive through this, and hopefully Judaism, this community, all of us together can help in supporting one another with that challenge.